check out this adorable blossom fluffy puff. I'm going to show you how to make this. What you're going to need are just a couple of pieces of Cuddle fabric. I'm using Cuddle Minky from Shannon Fabrics, and this is just their standard C3. These are actually cut-offs from a quilt I did, and I used this yellow on the back, and then a little scrap of white. So you'll need two pieces that are 6 by 6 inches. Your embroidery machine, I'm just using plain white thread for the whole thing because the thread doesn't really show up, but you could use thread to match your fabric that you've chosen. I've got a tiny piece of fold over elastic and a little piece of hardware, and of course some polyfill stuffing. Other than that, and your embroidery machine, that's all you need to make one of these ridiculously cute little fluffy puffs. So let's head over to the embroidery machine and let's make one together. Okay, so we are going to put our tearaway stabilizer that's been tightly hooped. Hear that? That's what you want to hear. We're going to put that on our embroidery machine, and we're going to run a placement stitch. This placement stitch is going to show us the area that we need to cover with our fabric for the blossom fluffy puff. Now the blossom and the flower in the flower fluffy puff set, both are exactly the same. One just has 5 petals and one has 6 petals. And for people that have a certain preference, I put both of those in there. The file is also in the file set in both sizes. So I'm going to cover that placement stitch now with a piece of Cuddle fabric. These are just scraps that I have from the bottom and sides of other projects, so I can make sure that it covers the placement stitch. If your fabric is floating around and you're worried about it, you can use a little bit of 505 spray on your stabilizer. You don't want to spray your fabric, you just want to spray the stabilizer, and that'll help hold it down. But the next step is going to be a tack down stitch, which stitches the fabric to the stabilizer just so that it can be smooth and held down for future steps. That way you don't have to worry about the background fabric getting rumpled up or wrinkling out of place. Okay, so our background is stitching, and while that's stitching, I'm going to trim off this excess fabric. I'm not pulling on my fabric that's hooped at all. I just want to get that out of the way. So on this version, I'm using my 140 by 140 millimeter hoop. That's approximately 5 inches by 5 inches, although it's just a tad bigger. So check your file and see what size hoop you need on the machine that you are using to make sure that the file fits in there. There are 5-inch flowers and blossoms in the design set, as well as 4-inch for those of you who only have a 4x4 hoop. All right, we're all tacked down. Now our fabric is secure. So what we need to do now is run the next step, which is going to put some details on the fluffy puff for us. So let's run the next step. And you can see I'm not changing my threads at all. I've got the same color thread the whole way through. It's actually just a white isocord thread. And I have white bobbin thread in. Because we're using Cuddle fabric, we don't actually see the thread in our project. We see the effects of the thread, but we don't actually see the thread because the fibers or the pile of the fabric is fluffy. On Cuddle, it's actually 3 millimeters high. On the C3 Cuddle, that's why it's called C3. If you're using another fluffy fabric, then you'll experience the same effect. And in fact, to get the stitches to show up as the thread color, we actually have to do some things to make that happen with Cuddle fabric. But since all this does, it's giving us the placement line for the center of our blossom or our flower, and it's also defining the petals for us. As I was testing this design out, I realized that without these blossom areas, the flower kind of lacked a little something, so I added those in, and I'm very happy with how they make the flower look. Okay, Now we have the center area defined. The next step is going to tack down our center fabric. So what I have is another piece of C3 Cuddle, and I'm simply going to lay it over that center area. This is just a little scrap, and I'm going to let the design tack down that center area. Okay, we're tacked down, but we need to trim around the applique center in order to let our finishing stitches finish this up nicely. So I've got some double curved scissors, and I'm going to lift up my applique material at the edge and just barely give it a little tug as I trim the fabric all the way around. And this will help you get a nice clean line that you'll probably not have to do much touching up afterwards. We're taking advantage of the stretch of the Cuddle fabric just to tug it away. If you have little bits of Cuddle dust, you can simply wipe those away or use a little handheld vacuum and vacuum those up. You could also use a lint roller. I have a little vacuum cleaner for my sewing machine that I like to use. And sometimes when I'm working on top of the fabric, that is what I'll do. Okay, my needle came unthreaded when I moved that out of the hoop, so let's just thread that back. There we go. And now the design is going to stitch a finishing stitch. So it's just a light zigzag. It gives that area just a little bit of contrast, holds that edge down, and it's just a nice little finish. Let's get rid of that thread right there. You'll see me trimming threads as I go, and I like to do that while I'm stitching because I feel like it gives a cleaner finish and I don't have to do so much finishing work afterwards. Now, the next thing that the designer is going to stitch for us is a little placement stitch so that we know where to put our hardware loop. So what I have here is I have some fold over elastic. This is just simply called decorative trim. I got this one at Hobby Lobby, but it comes in lots of solids and printed colors. You can also order these fold over elastic style trims from places online like Boutique Emily. And there are lots and lots of colors and patterns. The kind I like using best is about 5/8 of an inch wide for these fluffy puffs. And so look for the size. I feel like that's just the right size and width for these projects. The other thing that I have is a little lobster clasp. This one is just got a little D on it. It's very small, but whatever size lobster clasp or piece of hardware you want to put on that stays on, this is where you want to add it now. So I'm simply looping my piece of fold over elastic through the loop, and I'm arranging it so it looks nice. And so there's my piece of hardware. I'm going to lay the hardware on top of my fluffy puff right there. And I've got the tails or the raw edges sticking outward and the hardware piece is sticking inward. That way when we flip it right side out, that will be hanging on the top. And so what I'm going to do now is I am going to run the next step that will tack that piece of fold over elastic down. I want to make sure that this little piece of hardware is nowhere in the way. So I'm just going to make sure that I move that all out of the way. Okay, we're ready to finish this up. So what I need to do now is put my back piece of fabric over the top of this piece of fabric, and I'm double checking that my nap's running the same direction so that my front and back will have a similar feel. That's not imperative in a little project like this, but it is a little nice when those naps are running the same way. And I'm double checking that I've covered everything. And you can see this is a scrap. So this is a great use of those scrap pieces, especially off the sides and bottoms of the quilts that you may be using Cuddle on the back for. And now we're going to first start, and this is going to run our finishing outline. Now we're by no means finished because we've got to stuff it and hand sew it together, but we are very close to being done, at least with the machine embroidery. So this stitch is securing the front and the back together with the right sides together on the inside, and then we will flip it right side out. Okay, we are done stitching our fluffy puff, so we can remove it from the machine. There's our finished outline, and I'm simply going to pop my stabilizer out of the hoop, set that aside, and here's the front and here's the back. What I need to do now is remove the stabilizer before I start cutting anything, and because I'm using a very soft tearaway, I can easily pull the stabilizer away from the stitches. If you're using a tearaway that's more firm, then you want to be a little bit more gentle as you tear it away, because you don't want to put any stress on your machine embroidery. So I'm just pulling that away, and this is all going to be on the inside anyway, but I don't want any of that stabilizer to stiffen up the project at the end, so I'm removing it now. And that will let the fabric stretch like the fabric wants to. So I'm going to be able to take advantage of the stretch of the fabric and get some really nice definition in between those petals that stitched out when we did our placement for the center. Okay, we can throw all this away. All right, and this is just fine. I could get crazy and pick out all this, but it's going to be just fine. Now I need to cut around this outline. Okay, I'm going to cut about 1/8 of an inch all the way around. And when I cut, I'm paying special attention to any place where I have an inner corner. Like this is the area around side the turning gap hole. And then between all these petals, I have a little angle. And I want to put one little snip right up to the stitching, but not into the stitching. I don't want to cut any of that stitching. I just want to make sure that I get up close to there. And that way, when I turn it right side out, those little angles will be nice separated petals, and they will look very cute. If you don't use the little snip, if you don't cut that little notch there, then what happens is your fabric kind of pulls and looks a little bit rumply around the edges, and it doesn't have as smooth of a finish. Okay, so I'm going to snip right there and then right there. And if you find your fabric doesn't have as much stretch, say you're using a different fabric, not Cuddle Minky, you may not have as much stretch, and so you may actually need to do more clipping around these curves, not through the stitching, but just right up to it. And that way it relieves the stress around those curves so that when you turn it right side out, it'll look nice. Now over here at the opening, you'll notice that the design did stitch the edge of that petal on one layer, but not the other. That's going to really help us when it's time to close this up with our hand sewing, because we'll have kind of a guide to know where to stitch that closed. It's really hard on a curve to get a nice curve when we're hand stitching around, because it's hard to imagine that curve because we don't have a visual. This helps us have a visual. Okay, my hardware is inside. I can feel it right here. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to help wiggle that little piece of hardware out through the opening, and that's going to help me turn it right side out. Okay, here it is. There's my hardware. There's a tab, and now I'm going to grab the fabric and just maneuver the rest of that fluffy puff out. Okay, and then I'm using my fingers on the inside of each petal, and I'm kind of rubbing my fingernail just along the seams to help push the fabric out nicely. Okay, you could also use a hero marker or the blunt end of something rounded and smooth like a pencil or an eraser. Right here, I want to really push that seam out right there. That way my flower looks nice. You can already see the cute definition from those petals. And now it's time to stuff it. Okay, I've got a little bit of polyfill right here, and I'm simply going to use little bits of polyfill. Let's back up just a little bit. And I'm going to put them inside the fluffy puff. Now this opening is pretty small, but it's okay because we don't want to have so much hand sewing. You've got a good little opening to kind of put things through. But because we've got these petal details, we don't want to put in a whole lot at one time. I'm going to put my stuffing in and then kind of mash it over to each little petal as I go. And so all that stuffing that I just put in there is kind of right in here, far away from the opening. So it's kind of the furthest away. And I'll get another little piece of stuffing. And I'll do each little petal like that as we go around. And then at the end, I will fill, you know, after I get these far away petals filled, then I will start filling the middle, and then I'll fill the petals that are closer to the opening. I'm seeing, I'm just putting little bits in here, and if I feel like they need more, I can always add more. Do you see how that stitching kind of really defines those petal areas? I love that. And the first one I did with the 6 petals did not have that definition, and it just didn't look as cute. Okay, so it's already taking shape, and I'll just add my little bits of stuffing, just stuffing those in. If you need to, you could use a chopstick, or sometimes the bags of stuffing come with a little stuffing tool. You could absolutely use that to help get the polyfill in the right place. And see, look how cute that is. Okay, a little bit more. A little bit more up at the top there, as I can see as I'm holding it in my hand. I don't want it to squish. I want it to be nice. I want it to be hard, but I don't want it to be unstuffed feeling. So, and different kinds of polyfill act different too. So use what you've got, and if you don't like how it acts, or if it has a certain texture or feel, try another brand of polyfill. What I'm using is from Fairfield World. It's their regular polyfill plush filling. But there are lots of different kinds of polyester stuffing out there. Oh, look how cute this is. Okay, so I'm going to put a little bit more in the middle here because I want the middle to be nice and fluffy. Not a whole lot, just a little bit. Okay, and just fill that little area right underneath the center. Okay, see now it has a little bit more fluff. Okay, and I do like that a lot. Super cute. This little circle area would be a sweet place that you could add a tiny little monogram, or even, I don't know, an initial. That would be cute too. So imagine an initial here. These would be great for like logos, if you put the logo of, you know, the team logo on it. So these would be super cute for your team. I'm thinking I just wanted flowers to hang on my bags because I love flowers. And it is fiesta time here in San Antonio, so this is a cute fiesta color. Everything is super bright. Okay, so here is the last little bit that I'm stuffing in, and this is the one right at the opening. So I might want to, you know, just adjust this as I'm sewing that opening closed. It's already pretty full, so that stuffing doesn't want to go in there, but who's in charge here? Me. I'm in charge. My project. So I'm going to tell it. This is what we're doing right now. Okay, now once that filling is all in there, I'm adjusting, and I'm kind of pulling it back up toward the opening so it'll fill out that shape. Now, do you remember where the machine stitched us a petal right here? Even though, you know, we're not, that is our opening. When we have that little line right there, that's going to really help us get a nice stitching. So we need to stitch our back to our front right on that stitching that was already done for us on the embroidery machine. So I'm going to kind of pull out the back a little bit so I have, you know, a petal that matches. And I can see that I could add just a wee bit more stuffing right there. And we are ready to stitch this little guy closed. Okay, so let me get a hand sewing needle. I have one that's already threaded. Nope, I gotta thread one. Okay, here's my needle. And let's get some thread. And I'm simply pulling out a length of thread from my sewing machine over here. Of course, you can start with fresh thread. Sometimes when I'm closing my stuffies, I do want a stronger thread. So you know what? Let's get a little bit of stronger thread real quick. I'm just getting a length of thread. There we go. And this is just a 40 weight sewing thread that I'm using. So I'm going to thread my needle. And I've just got a gray thread, just plain light gray. When I'm working with Cuddle fabric, I don't really have to worry a whole lot about the color of thread unless I'm doing some, specific embroidery work and I want my thread to show up. But if I want my thread to show up, I've got to do some other things anyway. So for just general sewing, I'm oftentimes just using a light gray thread with Cuddle fabrics. Okay, so now I've got my two ends and I'm going to tie a knot at the end. Yep, that's a good knot. Okay, and let me show you how I close up a hole. So with this little knot here, I'm going to go into the back piece of my fluffy puff at the opening right there at the corner. And if I simply go through the fabric and just hope that knot catches, my knot's probably going to pop through. I'm tugging on it quite a bit. If your knot pops through, just like that one did, okay, not only did it pop through, it also unknotted. So let's knot that again. Okay, so if your thread pops through the fabric like that, what you can do is you can anchor it to your fabric by going through the back side, but before your knot comes all the way to the back of the fabric, go through the little loop that's left. So there's my knot and I went through it, and now I've anchored my thread to the fabric, and so now I can keep sewing without worrying about that thread popping through. And I am going to catch underneath the stitching, right, that stitching line for the petal, and then just go back and forth from the back fabric to the front fabric with stitches that are, kind of tiny. They're about 1/8 of an inch apart. So I can just go across the back side. Now the edges of my fluffy puff are tucked in, so I don't have raw edges here, but see, there's that stitching right there, and I can just go right underneath the stitching. That helps hold the fabric and make sure that I've gotten the backing and not just the fluff. And then, so see how I can kind of see my thread. There's my knot there. I'm going to poke my knot to the inside, and I'm going to draw these stitches together. And when I draw those stitches together, I can't even see them. Can't see them, can't see the thread, can't see any part of it. Now, you could do another kind of stitch. This is just, back and forth, like a little whip stitch. You could do a ladder stitch. That's one of my other favorite ways to close a piece up, but this is working just fine for me. We don't have to work so hard. It's just a little cute little thing. Okay, and I'm going to go all the way around here, kind of shaping it as I go, remembering that I don't want to be squishing that fluff that I worked so hard to get into that petal. I don't want to squish that out of shape, but I made a little knot in my thread. Let's separate that out and make it tidy. There we go. And I'm almost to the end of the opening. When I get to the end, which I think is going to be maybe just 2 more stitches here. I'll poke that little guy back in, just so he's nice and round for us. Sometimes stitching a rounded edge close is a little bit of a chore, but it's okay. All right, so now that's closed, I'm going to make a little knot right there by going under and then back in through the loop, tugging that tightly. If you're worried about that coming undone, you can do it again. And then in order to get that loop, that knot to kind of go down into the fabric, I'm taking my needle, got quite a long needle here, and I'm going to come out over here, so somewhere in the back, okay, and then I'm going to tug on this little knot until I hear it pop through the edge of the fabric right there. And now I'm going to tug and then cut this off, and my tails will actually disappear back into the inside of the fluffy puff, and they'll release that little tension that I had on there. Put my needle away, and now our fluffy puff is done. Look how cute that is. I have a couple of threads I need to trim off. Right. That guy, and there he is. He's done. He's so cute. And so this is the big one. This is the 5-inch one. So this is Blossom 5. You can continue to reshape it. You could also add some little embellishments. Maybe you've got a cute little bee button. That would be adorable on there. Or something else cute. But now he's ready to hang on your backpack, your bag, your briefcase, your computer bag, your duffel bag, your gym bag, wherever you want to hang a cute little fluffy puff. So I hope you enjoyed that. Check out this design and more over at Designs by Baby Moon. And thanks for watching.